Hi guys, Brexit of course has been extremely damaging for the UK and has also negatively impacted EU member states that traded a great deal with the United Kingdom. But that doesn't mean that some of the worst of Brexit can't be undone. If there's a spirit of cooperation and not one of antagonism, then the post-Brexit situation can be improved upon. Here Jonny Peters, who's a senior policy advisor at the E3G think tank, explains in brief some of the ways that the UK and the EU can work together for their mutual benefit. Have a listen.
Most of all, I think what's missing is a lot of untapped potential in the UK-EU relationship. So there's areas that are listed already in the TCA, including North Sea energy cooperation. So for instance, offshore wind grid planning in the North Sea together. There's huge untapped potential there. Freeing up the electricity trading arrangements between the UK and EU. This is costing the UK a significant amount of money at the moment that we're trading on really inflexible terms with the EU. And one last thing I think I'd point to is cooperation on carbon pricing. So the potential for the UK and EU to link their emissions trading systems. This again, I think will smooth over essentially a lot of potential non-tariff barriers, particularly when the EU is thinking about phasing in its CBAM. And I think we'll come on to some of this stuff in a bit, but I think this will help the UK to fulfill its targets. It will help the EU to an extent fulfill its climate targets as well. So if we're trying to push in the same direction, why not just accept that there's things we can do together to help us both get there?
Exactly. If we're pushing in the same direction, it's going to help both sides. Now, I think it's important to remember that Brexit can't be undone through these gradual changes, but it can, as he's pointed out here, smooth over some of the impacts of Brexit, especially in particular sectors. Now, I think it's interesting how over the last number of years, there has been a very antagonistic approach towards the European Union from the Brexiteer side. But under Rishi Sunak, the approach seems to be more that of cooperation. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, antagonistic, and ironically, Rishi Sunak being a Brexiteer, seems at the moment, wants to have a better relationship with the European Union. And we saw that with the Windsor Framework. Now, apart from what was pointed out here, I think there are other areas that the UK and the EU can work together for their mutual benefit. Security, for example, on terrorism, cybercrime, organized crime. We need both sides working together. When it comes to climate change, as was pointed out here, there can also be areas where there's transfer of technology. There is great know-how in both the UK and the EU. And it's important that for climate change, which is something that affects all of us, that we work together. And there can be also transfer of funds, for example. Even though the UK is a third country, and that's when it comes to trade, but I think when it comes to large projects, international projects where the EU is involved, the UK could be part of that as well. On science, of course, there are great universities both in the EU and the UK, and they can work together. Of course, as the UK is outside the Horizon project, and unfortunately Rishi Sunak doesn't seem to be very interested in rejoining that, at least at the moment. I'm sure there are ways that universities on both sides can work together for their mutual benefit. And finally, on health, of course, we saw during the pandemic the importance of international cooperation. And I think there can be, of course, cooperation within the region of Europe. The UK is an island, of course, but it's still part of Europe. And it's important that the UK is brought on board when, hopefully there isn't another pandemic, but in planning for future pandemics, in reaction to these future pandemics, I think it's important that the UK and the EU work together on this. So there are areas that there can be cooperation that benefits both sides. But once again, we have to be very clear about this. Until the UK rejoins the EU, a lot of problems are going to remain. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.